Good evening, chat. YouTube has finally decided to behave itself. Yes, I know, I'm early. You're going to have to deal with it, all of you mocking me for being late 10 minutes early. I have with me here today Charles Moskowitz. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and let the people know what you're doing?
Thank you very much. Right now, I'm hosting a live YouTube program on YouTube and affiliated platforms Monday through Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. And I'm taking calls, and it's amazing. People are calling in. It's like it has all the trappings of a good old-fashioned radio program, radio talk show like the type I used to listen to years ago. And I'm the author of many books. I've written a short book about the election, which is now available, called We're All Socialists Now, a deplorable looks at the 2020 election. I'm not even sure at this point if we can talk about that too much on YouTube.
I don't know. I wish I did. Certainly,
we can't know, yeah.
The depth of conversation is going to have to be puddle deep.
We have to do what the left has always done, which is speak in euphemisms and double talk and innuendo instead of good old-fashioned English like what President Trump actually is famous for.
Yeah, it's incredible how much of that goes on. I absolutely despise it. I have probably the first thing I ever remember somebody saying about me on this front. I was a teenager, and I got introduced as, "Hey, this is Don, the least politically correct person you'll ever meet." Yeah, so all this game where you have to dance around words, not my style. Never has been.
Right. No, I mean, I think one of the main reasons why Trump was elected was because he did not play that game. I mean, we're used to hearing all of this kind of lofty, sophistic doublespeak, which is a form of lying, of course. And I think it was French scholar Elaine Benescon called it the language of totalitarianism, which, of course, we're now back to.
It really is. This is the thing that drives me nuts. It's a personal peccadillo of mine, is that if you talk in the way that leftists do, you never say anything. And so everyone hears what they want to hear, and then you do whatever you want. And that's the shtick over and over and over again. So in the world of language of totalitarians, I absolutely believe it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the language of deception where you can literally have two opposite ideas expressed in the same sentence and do it flawlessly. I think that it was Donna Shalala, actually, former Health and Human Services Secretary in the Clinton administration, who observed when she took office that a good politician has to say absolutely nothing and say it gloriously.
That's the stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I at least get the incentive for the actual politicians. If you say something stringent, you can be held accountable for it. And not being held accountable is the story of politics, right? Oh, I was always trying to do the right thing, and it just didn't work out well.
Well, they all have this, and I'm saying this as someone who actually ran for office myself, in that you're surrounded by people who are whispering in your ear, don't say this, you'll offend that group, or don't say that, or try to talk to this side. And as a result, you try to say very little, and yet Donald Trump never did that game. I mean, he didn't have those kinds of people around him, first of all, and secondly, he would just go out and shoot from the hip. He would talk directly. And I know that liberals, his enemies, complained that he was lying, when in fact what they were fearful of was when he told the truth.
Well, I mean, that's the problem, right? You can't, if you have somebody out there saying a real thing, you can't answer them with nonsense, right?
Right.
As long as everybody is saying nothing, everyone can continue to say nothing. As soon as even one person says, "So here's a real thing," now you have to contend with a real thing. And that real thing's a real problem.
Right. Well, that's right. And we all got used to this kind of, euphemistic style, both, Democrats and Republicans, of course, and in general. And I think that maybe the one thing Trump did accomplish, if a lot of things he accomplished, but one of the main things was to cut through that and to cut through the
Yeah,
bullshit.
Definitively that. Honestly, I wish he did the political things better, but
Right.
Rhetorically speaking, I don't know that anybody really to the right of now that paid more than 5 minutes attention to him and didn't just read headlines had a problem with it. I get people all the time, usually leftists, who say stuff like, "Oh man, he needs to get off Twitter and stop giving these speeches." And I continuously ask, "Well, do you follow him on Twitter? Have you read his Twitter feed?"
Probably not. I mean, his Twitter feed was hilarious.
Oh, it was amazing.
Yeah.
After a little bit of this, my wife went and followed him on Twitter, and she went, "Don, this is really disappointing." I was told that this would be an endless supply of horrible things said. I thought that was going to be hilarious. I keep getting stuff with jobs reports. This is not funny. We need to get back to the funny stuff.
Well, I think he got a little better at it. I mean, in a sense, because sometimes he would veer off into stuff that was not exactly presidential. But, for the most part, it was a very cutting edge means of communicating directly with the American people. And it was in the best tradition of past presidents. I mean, I think it was FDR who developed the fireside chat as a way to go directly to the American people using the technology of his day, the radio, and Kennedy used television. So, this is the means of communication now where Trump can do it, or could do it, a step over and an end run around all the smart Alex in the media who tell us what to think and how to think, and they translate. And he could go directly to the American people. And that's exactly why the oligarchs have had him expunged from Twitter. They actually removed him, a sitting U.S. president, from being able to do that.
That is ballsy in the extreme. And I think that was overplaying their hand, in my opinion. Though, don't get me wrong. I maintain continuously and forever that these people think they have won to such a degree that there's nothing that any of us can do. But the thing about that is that effectively they just told everybody who's not somebody, right? Everybody who's not a pre-designated winner of the world, you are a cornered dog and we will not let you run or fight. And I think that puts us in pretty dangerous territory.
I think that they are overplaying their hand by censoring the president of the United States, by taking down Parler, for example, just because it's competing with Twitter, and now by trying to convict Trump when he's out of office. I mean, everyone knows that the election had improprieties. Let's put it that way. We don't want to use the F word or the S word.
Yeah,
and I think,
God forbid you do.
Oh yeah, so we don't want to get taken down. But the point is that everyone knows this, and I think that they're confident that they have the upper hand, that they're controlling the high ground, and in a way they are. That they could do something as brazen as censor a president and censor people like Rudolph Giuliani and Steve Bannon and others who are Sidney Powell. I mean, these are important thinkers. Just because they don't like their opinion. And now with the so-called conviction, it's really, I just hope. I mean, look, on the one hand, obviously we're all concerned that we're sliding into a sort of a slow motion Nazism, but on the other hand, the left has a tendency to overplay themselves and they get exposed, and I think that's what's happening with this this so-called impeachment. I mean, it's obviously based upon a complete lie. And they now know that if there's going to be a trial, it's all going to get exposed. And my understanding is that there were a lot of Democratic senators that are begging President Biden to call Schumer and tell him to call this whole thing off, because the longer it goes on, not only is Trump going to get stronger and stronger, especially with the upcoming election in 4 years, but that it's going to expose the Achilles heel of their fraud. I mean, what actually happened and why.
Well, this is the thing. There's another suit out there that I think is going to do that, which is to say, Dominion is suing basically everybody who said anything negative about Dominion.
Right.
And and they're suing them for slander. And
I wonder if they're going to sue Elizabeth Warren. You know, my own senator, Elizabeth Warren, about a year and a half ago, along with Amy Klobuchar, got up in the U.S. Senate and said the exact same things about Dominion that are being said by Sidney Powell. And, you know, they're threatening to sue. I don't know if they've actually filed a lawsuit yet, but Sidney Powell has said, I think Giuliani also, they said, great, bring them on. You know, we're ready, because finally, if they do, we're going to have what's called discovery. That means that in a courtroom, at last, we're going to hear the evidence, and they're going to get their asses handed to them if they do that.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Because truth is an ultimate defense against a slander charge, right?
Right.
So it is going to end up, if they, and my understanding is that they have filed a suit, but it doesn't really have anything in it right at the moment. It's sort of the, I'm suing you for this, stand by for addendum, and then we'll get to service later kind of stuff that unto itself is shady to begin with, right? It's, if they had filled out the suit the next day and I had it, then that would be one thing. But the word is they did that something like 2 weeks ago.
I can't wait. I hope they do. It's going to be bigger than the OJ trial. You know, where the media won't be able to ignore this one. I mean, we'll see like the proverbial white car driving down the highway. I mean, we'll get all the evidence presented at last. That could be huge. So let's hope they bring it on. You know,
I would be worried about one thing, which is to say a gag order on it, right?
Well,
so
that wouldn't surprise me.
They take Powell to court. She throws out all the evidence, and then she's got it all there. As you know, this will be what we're submitting, and the very next thing that makes it to that court is the gag order. No TV cameras, no nothing. Nobody talk about this. That's it.
Well, that's not going to look good. I mean, they're trying their best to contain things now. I don't know if you saw in Maricopa County, there are lawsuits and there are subpoenas for election canvassers and the election board to appear before the state assembly and testify about Dominion software, and to allow for a complete forensic audit that's more than just a sample, but a full audit. Yeah. And they were apparently about to cooperate. Now it turns out that they're not going to cooperate, that they're fighting it. And, that could open up a whole can of worms if that comes down. So I think that the establishment, in a way, just as you say, Don, I mean, they're going to put in a gag order. They're trying to gag this one too. And, it's what they've done during this whole election. I mean, they've gagged any opposition. They've demonized and mocked anyone who questioned it. And, they're just going to keep the wagon circled. I don't know how long they could continue with that, though. I mean, we have to keep up the pressure.
I think the question is, how much pressure can we actually lay at their feet, right? Because they're pretty good at ignoring us. We come out and we say, this is a big problem, and they just kind of shrug it. It's not happening. What are you talking about? The Hunter Biden story is a prime example where that didn't exist until January 21st, right?
Right.
Make no mistake, the internet as a whole was like, are we going to talk about this?
Oh, we've been talking about it for a year, but you're right. I mean, we find out that the FBI had the laptop. We knew they had it anyway, but they finally, after the election, release it, and Bill Barr had his fingerprints all over that one. And I mean, it's a horrendous insider betrayal. It just looks to me like all of the insiders, both domestically and internationally, wanted to have Trump taken down. And it's not like I'm not suggesting that it was a conspiracy in that you have people sitting around in a smoke-filled room somewhere and figuring out how to do it. It was more of an informal agenda where everybody kind of thinks alike, and they do. It's like I remember my father told me that he asked his communist uncle, a man who I happen to be named after, he was like, how is it that you guys operate? I mean, what do you do? Like get a message in from the Kremlin? And he's like, no, we don't have to, because we all think alike. We all know what to do. We don't need to have a directive. And that's, I think, how this works.
I think it's more a combination of the two, and I know it was a combination of the two in Soviet Russia, if only because we now have the actual messages that they sent being put out.
Well, that's right.
But
of course, yes.
If everybody is generally on the same page, then the number of orders you have to issue is kind of limited, right? So the question isn't whether or not all of the powers that be wanted Trump got rid of, so much as whether or not, that somebody came down and said, yes, we're actually doing it. And that's all that it takes, right? It doesn't, you don't need to flesh out a giant plan. There's probably not, the dossier of how Trump was taken out, though that might be out there. But when you get, Dominion is clearly some, I'm sure I can't say much more.
We have to be careful here, right?
Yeah, they are clearly something along those lines, right? And that by itself suggests that there was, what's that favored word of the past few years? Collusion.
Right? Yes. I think that it had more to do with the fact that everybody knew their role. They all knew what they could do. And there was a general understanding that they would use their position, if necessary, to obstruct and to stop any kind of revelation, starting with, of course, the media, the Mockingbird media, the mainstream media, which would basically not only not investigate legitimate complaints and look at affidavits and interview people. They would not do that. Instead, they would mock anyone who tried to do it. The second thing is we find out how corrupt our judiciary is, both on the state and federal level, including the Supreme Court, where they would not allow for the evidence to be presented in its proper venue, which would have been a courtroom where it could be questioned, and maybe we'll find out that it wasn't real. The point is we won't know because it didn't get that far. And then, of course, the third and final leg on the stool is the U.S. Congress, the joint session of the House, when they count out the electors, and they discover that there are 7 states that are being challenged by alternate electors, alternate delegates, and the Constitution says that, therefore, if one senator and one House member challenges the election, there's a debate that can go on for up to 2 hours. The minute that started happening, all of a sudden you get this guy showing up with the buffalo horns and the fuzzy hat, and everything comes to a complete halt. We never get to hear the evidence in its proper venue. And then they wait till after the midnight in the wee hours of the morning when everyone's asleep, and they gavel Biden in. So we're never going to get to really know. So if people are saying, it's ridiculous that we claim there might have been improprieties, right? We can simply respond by saying, well, because of the way the system was working at the time, we're not going to know because the evidence has not been properly presented in its rightful form.
I think the reality of that as a whole is that, real early on, before YouTube lost their mind over discussing what was going on, I said, look, I'm not going to cover any of the evidence anymore. I'm not like I over in a couple of the side forums for the channel. I'll give you guys a place to post it. And make no mistake, the sleuthing of the channel is incredible. There's a mountain of evidence in there, and there's a ton of stuff. But after a certain point, I went, if by this point you don't know that something is wrong enough to look into, it's because you don't want to know. You are motivated not to know. And that was, I think it was 10 days after the election or something like that. And I just said, look, that's it. It's, we're to the point where now what you're seeing is political motivation, not interest in the truth.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's most shocking to me isn't that there might have been people involved in deliberate improprieties and consciously involved in that, but the numbers of Americans who either don't care or they don't want to know, or they're so besotted ideologically with hatred, this irrational hatred for President Trump that they cannot quite express, that they actually want this to happen and they wanted to see it happen. And I think that describes a lot of people. And in a way, it shows how successful this propaganda campaign was against him with this constant day after day, month after month, negative drip, these constant conspiracy theories put out by major media, including the New York Times, where they would come out with some cockamamie story, usually sourced by one anonymous source. And then they'd wait 24 hours after the damage is done, and then they would retract it quietly. I mean, this was the pattern. All standards went out the window in this open and brazen and naked assault on that government. And you and I could have a great talk about why they were motivated like that, why the conscious people were motivated. But the thing is that most people who fell into this are not conscious of why. They just know that they better get in line, because if they don't, they're going to have to pay a price in terms of where they stand socially in the world. And that's a big influence.
That's definitely true. I had personal friends early on in the Trump campaign or Trump presidency that were kind of lefty-ish, and they knew they hated Trump, but they really didn't know why.
Yeah.
And you press them on it and you get, well, he did, he never does anything that I like policy-wise. And I went, honestly, the guy doesn't govern like ridiculously conservative. He probably does a lot of things that you like, whether you know it or not. And they, oh, no, he doesn't. And you start telling them some of the stuff that, I guess that is pretty good. I guess that's all right. I guess that's all right. Well, but he says mean stuff. And numerous times was, so a guy who is doing what you think is the right thing, taking, provably improving the lives of most people in this country.
Right.
And most of the people that he's not improving the lives of are people that you guys hate anyway. So that's a bigger problem, or that's not as big of a deal as that he says whatever ridiculous thing that, by the way, is probably taken out of context that you didn't like. How could there possibly be taking out of context saying there were both people, good people on both sides? Well, did you watch the 30 seconds before and after that? Because if you did, you'd find out.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, and these were complete hoaxes, and Trump was absolutely right about that. Completely fake stories, utter hoaxes. And the thing that bugs me most about those is that they really ripped at the social fabric of this country just to get Trump. They didn't care about the fact that they're fanning the flames of racism and all of this stuff they claim to be against just to get Trump. They concocted these ridiculous and really wicked hoaxes against him just to take him down. And look, I think the reason why they wanted to take Trump down and make up these lies was because Trump stood for one thing that is absolute anathema to the international establishment, and that is making America great. I know it sounds corny, and I know that you probably have Obama and Clinton and the Bushes. They might have intoned that, during a speech, they might have said these things. But in the case of Trump, everybody knows that he really meant it, and that it makes sense, and it threatened to wake up the beast. It's sort of like, hello, of course we want to make our country great, just like we want to be great as individuals, just like we want to put our family first, our own, life first. Trump was simply saying the obvious. I mean, this is a fact of nature. Animals understand this. You put yourself first, right? The beaver understands it when they build a dam. I mean, you don't put the neighboring, enemy first. You put your own house in order. It sounds simple, but it is anathema to this internationalist establishment that wants to turn the United States into a province of the world, and that does things like national borders and, individual rights, that these are like anachronisms. These are old-fashioned ideas that need to be gradually expunged from people's consciousness.
Well, this is right on back to the earlier, you say nothing so that everybody can agree with it kind of thing that politicians do. There definitely has been, you go back and listen to Obama speeches, and I guess if you wanted to interpret them in the right way, you could say that he wanted to make America great, but only insofar as we were a global entity. We were going to usher in the Great Reset, let's be honest.
That's right. That's
today's standard, that was apparently our job. And he was, that was going to be the thing, the major contribution that we made. And it's pretty clear that that's what he meant.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Clinton's just kind of a lunatic. So basically, anytime she says it, you can just assume she was just angling for votes.
Oh, they all were. I mean, this is all just rhetoric for them. This is just the type of stuff you have to go out and, it's boo bait for the bubbers. I mean, they just throw this stuff out there because it sounds like what you're supposed to say. That's what I mean by the double talk. They don't mean, this is all just, a game. I mean, an interesting, little insight. I mean, I think it was none other than Kamala Harris, who right after they were nominated, she went on with Colbert, right, who hates Trump, and he's you figured there was a softball interview, and he asked her one actually fairly earnest question where he said, "Look, during the debate, you basically called Joe Biden a racist. You called him a sexist. You called him, abusing women. You called him all these things. Now, all of a sudden, that you're his vice presidential nominee, everything is fine." And, she turned to him with that maniacal giggle, and it's just very very distasteful. And says, "Oh, that was just a debate. That was just a debate. Ha, ha, ha." Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know? I mean, that's all they see these things as. These are just things you toss out there to win at the time, to get where you want to be. It's not that they actually mean anything. You think she gives a damn about racism? I mean, not likely.
Not except in so far as it advances some other agenda that she has. And that's been pretty clear with these people for quite some time. You talk about, well, the welfare state's probably the best example in the world, right?
Right.
Well, we're going to bring people out of poverty. The welfare state has probably brought 0 people out of poverty that weren't otherwise going to get out of poverty anyway.
No, it destroyed the black family. It destroyed white families too. I mean, and Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was Assistant Secretary of Labor in the Johnson administration, predicted that. He said, "Look, at the time that they nationalized welfare, the black family was intact. I mean, they actually had stronger marriages than white families going back to after the Civil War. They valued marriage more because of the fact that they had to undergo the terrible, evil business of having family members sold off as slaves. And that this would destroy the black family." He predicted that. And it was absolutely the case. There could have been welfare done through charities. It could have been done and should have been done locally, where an individual could be treated with dignity and helped out of the situation, instead of turning this into this national massive entity that would basically make a lot of social workers rich and put a lot of liberals on payrolls, while it basically encouraged people to not get married and to have children out of wedlock and to get rid of the man in the house. That's, I mean, to talk about social destruction. I mean, this is, and you want to talk about racism. I mean, they literally and deliberately targeted the black community for this. And
I forget if it was Sol or Larry Elder. I think it might be Larry Elder, come to think of it, talks about that when he was a kid in the 60s, that social workers would knock on their door and say, "Well, if Dad's not in the house, you get more money, just so you know."
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were encouraging. It was the Cloward Piven article in Nation magazine. I don't know if you know about that, but they were 2 social workers, both Columbia University professors, both radicals, who wrote this article that was published in Nation magazine in 1968, where they suggested that the best way to bring about socialism in America was to overwhelm the system, to overload the system. And that meant in the area of welfare, to get so many people on welfare that the system would implode. And likewise, to stuff the ballot box. And that's why this organization Acorn got started. One of my books is about this. And they would submit so many fraudulent registrations and ballots that the system would just, become so overloaded that they could get through. And they did ballot fraud every 2 years from 1970 right up till they were finally disbanded.
Well, thank you, James O'Keefe.
Exactly. Yeah, he's right. He went undercover.
But and it's the thing is, it's not just them. Apparently this is just the topic of the day. I grew up in California, and if you don't know there's voter fraud in California, it's because you pay literally no attention, right? And equally, that the political system there is so rigged that there is effectively no hope of doing anything at a state level.
Yeah, what happened to California? California used to be, right up till probably the 90s, it was Reagan country. You had Orange County. You had Republican governors. I think the last Republican governor was probably Schwarzenegger. But the point is that you
the
had
last one to openly claim it.
That's another story. But you had Republican conservative infrastructure there, and then all of a sudden it's like a switch went off overnight, and suddenly everything turned blue, as they say. I mean, I find that to be very suspect. And we know that they use. We don't want to go too explicit here, but they use, things like ballot harvesting and e-voting and, gathering of votes from people who may be not qualified to vote and other methodologies.
The motor voter thing was the biggest and heaviest turn that I personally saw. And that happened right after they said illegal immigrants could get driver's licenses.
Well, the driver's license is an entree to register to vote.
Yep, and they did those at two separate times, but the voting numbers changed pretty dramatically after that, like unrepentantly, ridiculously dramatically after that, and there was just simply no way to get, California will never have a Republican senator again because of jungle primaries, and then motor voter and illegal immigrants can get driver's licenses. But on top of that, they have a bunch of laws that stop you from looking into voter fraud out there, which is not really surprising. And I imagine that, layer on layer here, it just gets worse every year is really the problem.
Well, I mean, you might have heard that they want the first piece of legislation coming out of this new Congress is a bill that apparently is going to legalize this kind of impropriety. It's going to say that there will be no national voter ID. There will be no expunging of local precinct voter rolls from people who either no longer live in a district or passed away. Mm-hmm. There will be, all sorts of stuff. They say like in Georgia, the vote was the young people came out to vote, which was why Biden won and which is why the two new senators won. Well, I think there's evidence that, young people came out all right, as in 16 years old. I'm just saying that you will no longer be able to ask these questions. It legalizes ballot harvesting. It legalizes mail-out votes so that a state, like in my own state of Massachusetts, they can just paper the house. They can send out massive, there's no standards in terms of actually, matching a vote with a signature. And they're actually going to try to pull that through the House.
Well, here's the thing: is that will probably become law, right? And it will be Harris that makes it happen because the Senate will be deadlocked, most likely, or a handful of rhinos will turn on us, and then it will pass by majority vote, and Biden will sign that, right? And
that's right. And that'll be the end of free elections in this country. We will never have another free election.
Oh yeah, the only thing that is even a vague hope at that point would be effectively all 50 states, though let's be honest, it will never be more than about 25, going to the Supreme Court and saying, hey, we get to run our elections per the Constitution. And for some reason, the Supreme Court deciding not to be corrupt, ridiculous, chess pieces in the game, taking that case and go, well, yeah, you're correct. You get to. And I don't see I don't see that happening.
I mean, but the thing is, it's one of these things where it is openly and blatantly unconstitutional because Article 2, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution actually has language in it that says, excuse me, that the state legislators, not the state governors, not the state judges, not state bureaucrats, but elected state legislators hold the sole responsibility and prerogative to make election laws in those states, period. And that's one of the reasons. That was the whole case of Texas versus Biden. I mean, versus Michigan.
Michigan and Wisconsin, I
Yeah,
think.
that's right. I mean, this was because in those states, it's interesting, in 4 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, you had governors do an end run around their legislators and make laws right up to the day of the election. In the case of Pennsylvania, even after the election, under the guise of the COVID-19 emergency, which is fine, but it's not constitutional. They had to go to the legislature. If they had a reasonable need to change the election laws, that's how you do it in our system. You don't just go in like a dictator and just rewrite them.
Yeah. And that, I mean,
excuse me.
Again, this seems, I don't know, this seems relatively obvious in my opinion, but this is the thing, is that one side of this discussion, it does not matter what happens as long as they win and get what they want. And
Right.
the other side is the rest of us who are concerned with, is there a process? Is it working correctly? Yeah, okay, I'll take my licks if I lose legitimately, but if I'm not losing legitimately, then I'm really upset, right? And look, that is definitely the more righteous angle to take. Truth be told, if they pass that law, and again, they're probably gonna, and it doesn't get overturned in the courts, then the correct answer, because the other thing that they're trying to go after is the Electoral College and make the winner of the popular vote the president of the United States. The correct answer is Wyoming passes a law, or South Dakota, or whomever, that says literally every other vote in the union plus the number of votes in my state is how many votes we submit to the popular vote. Right, so we choose. There's 300 million Americans. The Republican candidate gets 300 million votes plus the number of votes that the Republican candidate gets in my state. By the way, I'm still allowed to write election law for my state. You can't even ask if those votes are legitimate because the feds just told you no. I hope you enjoy never having anyone that's not a Republican president ever again.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, look, if they get rid of the Electoral College, I mean, the whole presidential election will just be in New York and Los Angeles. That's it.
Indeed.
It'll cut off all these smaller states. It'll cut off all of the rural parts of those states. I mean, if you look at a map of New York, or for that matter, California, but more so New York, you'll see that the blue part of the state in an election is really only centered around New York City. The rest of the state's red. I mean, it's
California's got the same thing. It's got a little strip down the coastline that comes inland a little bit, just at the southern tip. But and the whole rest of the state is deep red, and really, really deep red. If the coastline was its own separate state, the state of Jefferson guys got their way, that would 100% be Electoral College votes Republican 100% of the time.
Yeah, and I think there already are secession movements around this country right now. I think the eastern part of Washington State wants to create the state of liberty. You've got I think a state rep in Texas that has submitted a non-binding ballot resolution. Probably won't be signed by their governor, but nevertheless, it shows that the nationalist populist movement is alive and well in this country. And I mean, if they're going to start to craft new left-wing states like Washington, D.C., then that could end up at the same time crafting some more conservative states as well.
It might, but I don't think they'll let it happen, which I think will promote secession from the United States, which Texas is.
That's right.
Also trying to do.
So that we'll have another civil war. I mean, if that's what they want. I mean, I don't support that. I mean, I'm a union man, but nevertheless, I mean, it's, ultimately, if things are moving in a direction where we're losing freedom, then you can't tell what might have to happen.
Yeah. Thank you for being the only person I've met to say that, by the way, because up till now, I felt like it's just me. We're going to have a peaceful divorce from the United States. You really think the coast is going to let the center secede? Because that's not going to happen.
No, it'll be another confederacy. I mean, it would be, there'll be war. No, we don't want that. I'm against that. We should, I'm a union now, union today, union forever. I mean, we can't have that.
Yeah. And look, I don't I don't blame people for at least talking it through, right?
Right.
Hey, look, if they're just going to cheat and, and make no mistake, Biden's coming for both the First and Second Amendment, and he's been in office for 8 days. Okay, I get it. On the other hand, if we're going to go the route of secession, you better come to me with a good argument for a civil war, not a peaceful divorce.
No, there are ways to challenge this short of that. I mean, it's going to take a while to develop that strategy. I think there's already positive developments. I would point to, for example, a federal judge in Texas, that being Drew Tipton, who was appointed by Trump, who has said that they're not, he's suspended and put a stay on Biden's executive order to eliminate deportation. This is in a sense what the left had been trying to do to Trump. Now we have, if there's one thing Trump did, he did leave in place hundreds of patriotic, constitutionally minded federal judges, even on the Supreme Court, although I don't know, I'm not so sure there, but this was right. I mean, and also I think that the phony conviction is dead in the water. I think they're trying to find a graceful way to get out of that, because it's only going to further expose the F word in terms of what they've already done. And even Mitch McConnell, who is not to be trusted, he has let Schumer know that they're not going to get rid of the Senate filibuster, so they're not going to be able to just gavel through everything they want with just a 50-50 majority.
Well, this is the judges thing I worry about, right? Because it was mostly this. I'm sure, like everybody else, it's mostly that the Supreme Court judges that I spent a lot of time invested in looking in, and there were not necessarily particularly amazing things there.
No, very disappointing, very disheartening.
And that makes me worried about a lot of the other judges, though it seems like by accident we would have at least got some that were pretty.
A couple, I think, might have slipped through. You had a few people, Federalist Society, a couple of good conservatives, a couple of good constitutionalists. He did pick some good ones, I think. So we'll see.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though, right, is that we will see over the course of time, and everything else is just prognostication, often without evidence. So.
No, that's right. That's right. But I do think that generally we're seeing a tide turning in our favor, and it's kind of a gradual thing, especially as they've become more extreme and as they really are, I think, showing their hand. I mean, most Americans don't support most of those executive orders that were signed, like almost as if in a dictatorial way. And when
that was, I got to say, there is mirthful enjoyment in the number of people going, I didn't vote for Biden to do this. The pipe fitters union out there losing their mind.
Oh my
God. And I, for the first couple of days, I just shrugged. What were you expecting? I get that nobody, because somebody was out there. Oh, politicians say they'll do all kinds of things and they never do any of it. I mean, well, you had to know the Keystone Pipeline was coming. Whatever else was coming, you had to know that was coming. Oh no, I didn't think you'd do it.
It's a gift to the oil companies, and not even domestically either.
No,
it's going to drive up the cost of oil.
OPEC is about to go back to rolling, literally sleeping on beds of money.
Oh yeah, it's going to, once again, we'll have an energy imbalance. You have the rejoining of the Paris Climate Accords. That's just a giveaway to the internationalists. Do you think that's going to pull a single particle of carbon out of the atmosphere? I mean, that's just, if anything, it gives a pass, because you'll notice that China and Russia, and I think probably Brazil and some other countries, they're not members of that group, that organization. It's only us in the Western democracies.
So China is a member of the Paris Climate Accord.
Oh, it is?
And if you go read China's portion of the Paris Climate Accord, it says that they can pollute an infinite amount for something like 25 years, as long as at the end of that, they decide that maybe they'll tone it down, because they listed themselves as a developing country.
I see. Well, then, and I suppose after 25 years of dirty oil and fuel dumped into the atmosphere, they can just simply drop out.
Probably, right? Because that will be the real answer.
That's right.
Well, thanks. You guys weren't going to give us any hell because we were a part of this. Now you want to give us hell because we're a part of it. All right, we're leaving. it's
And we're back
exactly
to a
what we should
policy of
expect.
perpetual war for perpetual peace. Back to already escalating troop engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. You know, you have this guy Blinken, now Secretary of State, who only a few months ago gave an interview where he said that we should be at war in Syria. You know, Trump was a peace president. Whatever happened to the left on that? I mean, you think that, remember Marvin Gaye, right? We don't want to escalate, right? War is not the answer. Only love can conquer hate. Whatever happened to that?
This is, I think that is a sales pitch of, well, I don't know how else to say it. It's a sales pitch of communism, right? So you can be at war as long as you're promoting the crazy lefty agenda, right? And Stalin did this, Mao did this. Oh, war is terrible. We should never be at war. By the way, we got to go conquer that little country over there to make sure it's communist too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a policy that's been in place since World War II, when this country is involved in, you know, there's a historian, Charles Austin Beard, who wrote a book in the 1920s called Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace. And that was before the establishment got rid of historians like him, who were writing honest books after World War I and looking at what happened. And he pointed this out, that this is a policy of the United States going forward. We're going to constantly be involved in these endless, senseless, brutal wars that are doing nothing but promoting more instability, more violence. I mean, look at like the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. I mean, it's the longest standing war in this country. Do you think it's resulted in any peace there, let alone whether we should be involved? I mean, these are part of an agenda to weaken this country and turn us into essentially a police state for the world. We're mercenaries.
Have things gotten better? Sometimes. And that's really as good as it gets. But even then, you know, I don't know. I make inconsistent defenses of these things, right? Which, or rather, I inconsistently defend them is probably a better way to put it. I don't make inconsistent defenses so much as I inconsistently defend them. But Iraq specifically, right? We love this thing. We do this thing in this country where we say dictators that are committing genocides and purges are terrible, and we should go stop that. Now, if that's the standard, then okay, we could at least have that as a standard and then determine what those things are and find out whether or not we are going to be Team America World Police. We can debate that standard. But that isn't even the standard, because if it is, by the way, then taking down Saddam was correct. There's no two ways about it. He was certainly one of the worst people on earth. That is all true. I don't know what the hell that has to do with 9/11, but you know, if that's what we're going to do, then okay, do that. But this goes right on back to the honesty thing, right? Because if you said out loud, honestly, anyone anywhere on the planet who is committing a genocide, we're going to go stop, somebody would go, do you know how many people that is? Do you have any idea how many countries we're about to invade?
No, it's not the way to go about it anyways. I mean, if there is somebody that is so in violation of basic human rights, then the best response to that is to not trade with them, not, you know, to boycott, to not to maybe marshal local governments who are threatened, have a direct interest, and keep it local. It's like, you know, it's like a schoolyard bully, a bully, you know, having a fist fight. If you know, if you start to have everybody jump in and start to pile on, before you know it, you have 100 people fighting. You know, you want to keep it regional, keep it local, where, you know, these things happen. There are wars. It's never going to go away. Just like there's going to be violence. I mean, this is just part of human nature. But you don't make it into an international event and then use it as an excuse to, you know, increase your own power and to, you know, engage in international chess playing. You keep, you know, you work diplomatically to try to diffuse it and keep it local. I mean, that to me seems to be a more proper response in an imperfect world.
Well, it definitively does. But my point here is that, were we honest about this, as opposed to whatever we actually do, which whatever you call it is not honesty.
No, I don't think
And
we were. I mean, we were picking and choosing. You
yeah,
know, if we were honest about genocide, we would have taken on the Soviet Union or communist China.
Yeah,
they were just as bad as the Nazis, if not worse.
Yeah, we would, either one of them, realistically.
For sure.
We would have been invading, back in the 60s at the absolute latest?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The Cultural Revolution was it 30 million 30s, people?
But
exactly. No, it's all part of this kind of unseen agenda anyways, but whatever. We don't know we can't know that because we're just a couple of poor schlubs.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's why the hat says pleb. That's,
Yeah.
Though on that front, I have to say the one thing that has continuously stopped this general agenda, and my take on this agenda is that it has not changed particularly in a century. It evolves, it grows. There are minor changes, but it is effectively the same people doing effectively the same thing with all of the effective same goals since at least the turn of into the 20th century.
For sure.
And the one thing that continuously makes them fail is that eventually the populace kind of just stops doing what they're supposed to. And that causes them innumerable problems. So, the secret police at the end of the Soviet Union was comparatively weak to how it was in the heyday of the Soviet Union. And that stops you from being able to go after black markets in the same way that you used to be able to. It stops you from being able to enforce things in nearly any way that you were originally. My only problem with that is that being the answer here is that it almost always has taken some sort of outside influence to make that happen, right? So I forget if it was Reagan or if it came before him that said, "Look, we're gonna destroy the Soviet Union with pantyhose and socks," right? And look, that worked.
It did.
But who's next? Who's the next country that's going to destroy the Soviet Socialist Republic of the United States? With socks and pantyhose. I don't know that there is more.
Well, I mean, look, Reagan actually did an incredible job of bringing the Soviet Union to its knees, and he did it by basically turning up the screws on them economically. My understanding is he brought some of the big American corporations into the White House, and he asked them as patriots. He can't order them because this is a private, they're private companies, but he asked them to no longer sign deals with the Soviet Union and to maybe cut back on whatever they can do within the context of the deals they already had going. But more importantly, he began and I mean this in a positive sense, a propaganda campaign against the Soviet Union. He contrasted their evil system with our superior system, and he did it in ways that were no holds barred. He started with Radio America. Eventually he got the Soviets to agree for something. I mean, this sounds like a simple thing, but they opened a McDonald's in Moscow, and people had to wait in line for hours just to get a lousy hamburger. They couldn't even use the French fries in Russia because they weren't good enough. They had to import them. And it was one of these cultural events that raised the awareness of the Russian people in terms of what they'd been missing and how deprived they actually were. And, it was things like that. I mean, simple things. Reagan going to Russia and going into a church and talking about God. These things had a devastating effect on Russian society, and the whole thing eventually imploded on its own rot. And he did it without firing a shot.
Yeah.
So, I think there was some proxy wars, but you know what I mean? I mean, it was not like
one or two.
Yeah, maybe, but it was for the most part done peacefully. He galvanized other allies like Thatcher in England and Lech Walesa and other world leaders, the Pope, and he got it done.
Well, this is what I worry about. Is one, I don't think we have a Reagan coming, right? And everyone and their brother like to compare Trump to Reagan, okay, some of those comparisons are legitimate, right? His roasting of the media is certainly very Reagan-esque. Certainly, the more the only time in history that I'm aware of that the Federal Register shrank was under Reagan. And Trump may not have been able to get that particular thing done, but he was certainly curtailing its growth as hard as he was readily able. So again, some of these comparisons are good. They were both kind of terrible on guns. But the thing that Reagan could definitively get done, and I think this might be more that, I guess the only term for it left is the deep state, now that the New York Times has agreed it exists. But the deep state in Reagan's era was definitively not as powerful as it was by the time Trump hit office. And so the capability to do some of the other things that Reagan did is probably not there, regardless of whether or not Trump had the skill. If it's just impossible now, then you can't do what Reagan did. And I think that is a particularly worrying development.
Oh, it is. I mean, I think that Steve Bannon actually defined the concept of the deep state very well when he said that Reagan, not Reagan, Trump in the early days, he intended to dismantle what he called the administrative state, which of course has been growing ever since the election of Wilson in 1912, which was very pivotal. And that this was essentially a transfer of governing powers from elected officials on the state and federal level to unelected, faceless bureaucracies that both domestic and even international, that they would assume governing powers, and they're not accountable, that they can pass laws, but they call them something else, guidelines, whatever they call them. And that more and more the actual government itself, the elected government, becomes nothing more than like a window dressing. Now, I interviewed on my show, and you might try to get him on. I don't think he does any more interviews, but this guy, Michael Glennon from the Tufts Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, near where I happen to live. And he's an establishment figure. He's a liberal left. He served in the Senate as a legal counsel. He served, I think, in the Clinton administration. And he wrote a book called Double Government, where he talks about this phenomena accelerating in 1948 when President Harry Truman signed the National Security Act and did it without congressional approval. And it was that act that consolidated the CIA, which had been previously the OSS, the National Security Council, the DSA, and several other of these security agencies. It created the security state, in other words. And that this state, according to Michael Glennon, this isn't me saying this, it has become so powerful and so pervasive in all elements of American life, not just in government, not just even on the judicial branch, but in business, in the culture, even in churches, that they have their tentacles. They got their fingers in everything. They've got off the budget, means of raising who knows how many billions or trillions of dollars without congressional awareness. They've got such influence that he refers to it as the double state. Now, when I had him on my show, I asked him some pretty tough questions, and he didn't like my thinking on this. But he said that I thought I made a point. And I think that's what we have now. We don't have elected government. It almost doesn't matter who's elected. That's why Trump was so powerful, because Trump actually believed that he was the president of the United States, right? He wasn't just, Obama is a classic example of this Manchurian candidate. He came out of nowhere. No one ever heard of him. He probably has some things in his past which he could be blackmailed with, and we don't want to get into that, but you know what I'm talking about. And
I do.
Yes, we all do, but we're not going to go there. But he, in other words, he was the perfect kind of person, ambitious, wanted power, who could be put in there and do the bidding of this deep state. I will mildly contradict you there. Sure.
Only insofar is I think we are further down the road than that, right? So Obama pretty clearly held some true belief. He wasn't necessarily, if you were to say, a true believer. I think he was a little bit more cynic than that, but he very clearly, not that he could articulate anything without a teleprompter, but if you got him kind of onto his own devices, once you got past all the and the you got that he did intrinsically understand where they were going and that he wanted it.
Yeah, I think
and
that's
it
true.
Was, so I don't know
that's
if
fair.
he is taking orders so much as he is
he's part of it.
A partner in crime.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think that in a way, the Clintons are a classic example of people who are just grifters, who are able to like defraud, raise money and do all kinds of things short of murder, or maybe even not so short. And the thing is, but they could get away with it because they served this establishment. And as long as they did, they knew that they could just operate one step ahead of the law and enrich themselves and do it practically whatever they want. I mean, this is why we seem to have almost a dual system in this country now, in terms of we see people who are involved with serious crime and then either never investigated, or if they are, they're given a pass. Whereas if you or I had did like a tiny tenth of this stuff, we'd be in the big house. I mean, it would be, they'd throw the book.
There was a guy that was getting charged with mishandling classified information right at the same time that Hillary was. And the best of my knowledge, that guy is still in jail.
No, I think that there was a guy who he was like a young soldier on a U-boat, and he happened to take a picture or something. He went
not that
not
guy.
That guy.
That guy too. So there was a Marine that had some classified information that he brought back on a laptop from the Middle East somewhere. And he popped open his laptop one day, as we all do, and went, "Oh, hey, look, I've still got all this stuff." Read through it and went, "Oh my God, there's a thing where
Holy
like a base is going to get attacked." And so he called up his chain of command and he said, "Hey, look, I realize I'm not supposed to have this right now, but you need to tell people that they are about to get attacked, and we know that it's coming. And I know guys who are there, and no one is talking about this. So tell them now." And they said, "That's very nice. We'll probably tell them. However, bring us that laptop right now." And he said, "Okay, I can do that." And he brought the laptop in. They read him his rights, and they arrested him right then and there.
Yeah. All right. There you go. He was trying to save lives. I mean, those, that was obviously a mistake. It wasn't like he was deliberately going around dealing with classified emails and then deleting them in advance of an investigation.
Or removing classification so he can send them over unclassified.
That's right.
Systems.
That's right. So anyhow.
Yeah. There's your dual justice system in stark contrast, right?
Absolutely.
Because, this is one of those things where we used to talk about in the justice system, like, well, look, that is against the letter of the law, but it's pretty clearly not against the spirit of the law. You didn't go out of your way to take classified information, and specifically, you didn't try to distribute it in some way that is, is terrible. So look, fine, give me the laptop. You're going to lose out on the $500 or whatever you paid for that, but we'll call it even there.
Right.
And that would have been a sensical answer, but can't do that because you're a pleb,
Exactly. We're all peasants, basically.
Indeed.
It's like we're going back to serfdom.
We really kind of are. And yet another example of that is, the 6th versus the entire summer of 2020. Where you can burn down half the country, and it's a mostly peaceful protest. And then the 6th is,
and we don't really know what happened there.
9/11.
We don't really. I know it's like we're going to remember this day. We don't know exactly what happened. Let's just put it that way. I don't know if we'll ever get to the bottom of it. To me, it looked like something that probably had to do with Antifa. In fact, I was talking about this a week in advance on my own on my TikTok, where basically I was telling people to go down there and treat this with the dignity that the March on Washington of 1963 was treated. This is a civil rights event, and the March on Washington, where the late great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. People went down there dressed in a shirt and tie, and they wore their Sunday best clothes, and they brought their families, and there was an enormous amount of respect and gravity for the event. And, we all had information that this would be infiltrated by Antifa people dressed in Trump garb, and that they would try to be violent, and they would try to instigate and trigger violence and try to cause all kinds of trouble. We didn't know the exact nature of that trouble, but I really think that there's more than circumstantial evidence that that's exactly what happened. We know that there was this guy Sullivan who was connected to BLM and Antifa, who was posing as a journalist and filming, and that he was one of the people that was like, "Hey, let's go down there, let's break in,"
Yeah.
And there's also the very strange element of security at the U.S. Capitol, opening the doors and letting people in. I mean, this is the most important federal building in this country. I'm in Boston. About a year ago, I had to get my passport renewed, and I went to the Tip O'Neill building, which is the federal building here. I mean, I had to take off my belt. I had to put on my wallet and everything in a dish, and they zeroed that. And then I had to go through a metal detector, and they had a wand. I mean, that's not really even an important building compared to the U.S. Capitol.
You would think, but apparently, I don't know. And look, because this is how this has to go. I was physically at the Capitol building. I was not in the Capitol building, and I did not assault anyone. But definitively, there was Antifa there. And I was on the opposite side of the building from the door that was breached and all that other kind of stuff. But even over there, there was a time, in fact, there were quite a few times throughout the day where people were, there's a whole line of people waving flags and doing, what generally looks like protest. And then all of a sudden there's somebody over there screaming about communism. Unironically, yeah, man, we to hell with these people. We need to go have the revolution, seize the means of production. The whole crowd turned around and went, "Shut up, idiot!"
It looked like that to me. I mean, I only saw footage. I saw the film of those guys with the orange hats. That's not a Trump thing. Trump people don't wear orange hats. They might wear them to go hunting, but that's not, and they're marching down the street with chants that sound awful lot like BLM kind of chants. I mean, I'm sorry, but I mean, I don't know if this will ever be fully investigated. It might be like the so-called evidence. We'll never get to the bottom of it. It'll all be, but I mean, it just looks to me, I have a nose for this, having done radio over the years. It just doesn't look right.
And it doesn't. Even the stuff that I was nowhere near looks absolutely terrible, right? If you want to tell me, so many times where you see politicians come out and say they could have burned down the building. And the answer to that is not what anybody wants to hear, which is, we could have burned down the building. And literally no one could have stopped us. And if you're in a situation where you can do a thing and you don't do it, it's because you didn't want to. And it's basically that simple.
I mean, there's very little damage done in the building. I mean, people were, and you saw policemen, basically they're taking selfies with people and walking around. I mean, I'm not saying that anybody should have gone into the Capitol. That's a crime. But, it's not like, I mean, and this idiotic, asinine conspiracy theory that somehow Donald Trump decided to seize the government and become president by sending this guy with a fuzzy hat and the buffalo horns in to take over the Congress. I mean, it's more idiotic and more asinine than the entire theory that Trump was spying for the Russians, which of course we spent 3 years on. I mean, hobbling in the administration. And I just think that people aren't buying these. These things are lies. I mean, I know this is not comparable, but when the Chernobyl accident happened in Russia, this was in the final year of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union did what they always do, what communists always do, which is they lied about
Mhm.
it. They first of all they withheld the information for 3 weeks while nuclear stuff was floating all over Europe. And then when they
And then,
finally got around to admit it, they said they blamed the United States, they blamed everybody. And I think it
yeah,
was at that point that the Russian people, that was the final straw. They knew that it was a lie. They had been put at risk. People had been exposed unnecessarily. And I think that was the end. And these kinds of, I'm not saying that these sorts of lies going on right now are at that level, but a regime or an establishment can only go so far with these kinds of lies, where people do start to wake up. You have a moment of truth, like a moment of revelation that, hey, this is bullcrap. This is not happening.
yeah.
Right?
I agree. I worry now. Don't get me wrong. There are mitigating factors the Soviet Union didn't have to deal with. For example, social media still exists for the moment, and regardless of whether or not they try to take us all down, I mean, to the point that I'm not a particularly big show, but I am already in a position where I have things that they simply cannot take down. It is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And as well, it is sort of possible-ish, but as this
They
grows,
can pull the plug if they
very-
want to. I mean, I have that too. I have like a subscription to Podomatic, which I pay for. It's not expensive, but it would be more difficult for them to take that down because I own that in a sense. And
Oh no! So I own the physical hardware.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So, I mean,
See, I don't have that kind of money, but I mean, I do what I can. I'm trying to diversify my platform because I figure if they take me down on one of them, I'll be up on the other one, at least theoretically.
Yeah, I'm doing that too, right?
We all are.
But for the moment, there is still and still going to be something that looks like social media. So the capability of the general populace to know things at least exists. And so the Soviet Union didn't have to deal with this, right? You had to go through rumor mills, and maybe a guy from the next town over comes by and says something. However, they did have 60, 80 years, depending on how you want to calc the time frame there. But regardless, somewhere between 60 and 80 years, where they ran things and really did the most horrible things in human history.
That's true.
The equal and opposite of we have some capability to fight back is we definitively have the capability to do much more horrific things now than they did in 1930. So,
right. I mean, in a way, even with the censorship, media is much freer now than it was like in the 1960s, even when you just had the three major networks and they all said the same thing. And you had, Uncle Walter come in and tell us that's the way it is. We know that. Brinkley, Douglas Brinkley, the historian who wrote his biography, kind of dropped the goods on him in that biography by showing how left wing he was.
Oh yeah,
and that he would slant things.
He came out right before he died, I want to say, or a couple of years ago. I think he's dead now.
He is.
And he said, well, the reason we covered the Vietnam War the way we did is because I didn't like it and I thought it should end.
And that's why he lied about the Tet Offensive.
Yeah.
And that's why they lied about the Black Panthers as held up as some kind of heroic group when they were no different than the mafia. I mean, they were basically murdering people, particularly black people, in inner cities. So I mean, they might not have been able to have gotten away with that today because there's such a diversity of media. You've got cable, you've got online, you've got the dark media, you've got all of it. And so maybe in that sense, we're at least a little bit better off. But they are certainly going out of their way right now to try to rein it in. And, and we shouldn't be surprised by that. I would expect it.
I don't, even if you were surprised in, say, 2014 when it started, I don't know how anybody's surprised anymore, right? We're pretty far down the road now. Every time some major censorship thing happens, I see all these commentators go, "Oh my God, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they didn't do that 2 years ago."
Well, Don, let me ask you, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, I hear some people saying that they can't get away with this that much longer because they're going to start to lose money and they're going to start to lose relevance. Already, Twitter is taking a major hit for having, purged President Trump. I mean, they were actually thinking about some model that would result in paying for Twitter. These are companies. I mean, they have to eventually make a buck. Do you think this is going to continue, or do you think they're going to start to buckle?
I think we're going to see federal subsidization, and then they're going to do whatever they want.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And in some ways, I know that we already see that. It happens in a really roundabout fashion with YouTube, but YouTube has been a loss leader for Google basically since the moment they bought it. Right? And it wasn't making money for the guys who established YouTube to begin with, but Google thought it would be important, and so they kept it, and they've kept paying for it. And in the world of federal subsidization, the feds pay Google a ton of money, just a metric schmo. Mm-hmm. And outside of that, they do all of the things that we know Google does. Take your private information and sell it, and the ad networks and all that kind of stuff. But as the feds don't give you good numbers on this, but as far as effectively anybody can tell, the feds kick out enough money to subsidize YouTube all by themselves. So, we are already paying for this. We're just doing it in a way that's not obvious.
Yeah, I've heard this. I mean, I know that the main source of revenue is selling their cloud and their bandwidth, and a lot of that is apparently owned by or rented by the federal government. So, yeah, I mean, I've heard this. Yeah. It's very troubling.
It's not just that, right? The your personal information stuff is particularly terrifying. There's a guy, Steve Rombaum, gave a talk, Privacy is Dead. And I mean, this is a 10-year-old talk. And he talks about, look, Google will tell you what you ate for breakfast if you ask it. And if you are part of the federal government, you ask it every single day.
Oh yeah, I mean it's right. I mean this is what Edward Snowden talked about, that they know every keystroke. They Obama really expanded that. Obama was a bit of a control freak anyway.
Oh yeah,
he wanted to hear everything, both friend and enemy. I mean, he is apparently Angela Merkel. He's bugging, and she became so angry she went to the UN. So I mean, he was he just wanted to, and this of course, as a separate subject, it's what led to the FISA spying and the dossier and all of that. He wanted to control the means of, and to use classic socialist term, the means of communication.
Indeed, he did. And he, it's always hard to get information out of a group of people who are doing that, but everything that comes out of there says that, they do. Right. And the way that people who know behave tells me that what we know is the tip of the iceberg. Right. The things that even we have indications for, they know is particularly wild. There's a lot of discussions about where some of these leaked Trump calls came from over the course of the last 4 years.
Exactly.
There is 100% possibility that the various spy agencies went, well, that sounds like something we could use, regardless of whether or not they did. Did they have the capability? Guaranteed they did. So,
well, I mean, I think that, as I say, Snowden kind of blew the whistle on that one. They certainly did have the capability, and I mean, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because when they were releasing those phone conversations, nobody thought to ask, gee, how did they get that conversation? Were they bugging his phone? I mean, of course they were.
And I mean, clearly for the actual audio tapes, somebody was, unless the argument is that, you hear some amateur analysis of this where, well, this guy sounds nice and clear, like he's holding a phone up, right? This happened with the Georgia call, right? Where that idiot down there in Georgia probably holding up a cell phone, recording it, and then he leaked that. But you go listen to some of the tapes of when he's talking to foreign dignitaries, and they both sound like they're on the phone. They both got that.
Oh, I mean, it was so outrageous that they were releasing private conversations with the Prime Minister of Australia. I mean, what kind of a thing? The whole thing with the Russian, the Ukrainian perfect phone call. I mean, really? I mean, we now know that Obama basically marbled the bureaucracy before he left with various people that were going to try to hobble Trump and hurt Trump in any way they could. I mean, you had those two brothers during the phony Ukrainian impeachment. Remember the one with the wearing the fruit salad to testify? I forget his name.
That moron's
oh
name?
My God! I mean,
I'm so bad with names.
Horrible.
But,
and then his brother apparently was working in the publishing house, sabotaging Trump, and they were put in there by Obama in his final month, as he's leaving the office to not just spy on Trump, but to try to damage Trump. I mean, his whole testimony was nothing more than criticizing Trump's foreign policy, which is his business. Fine. He should resign and write a book if he wants. I mean, that's not impeachable. Trump's the president of the United States. If you have criticism of his foreign policy and you don't like it, you resign. You don't sit there and try to claim, oh, it's terrible that he's. I mean, it was ridiculous. Yeah. Anyway.
I am in entire agreement. I mean, look,
Vindeman is his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in the military under Obama, and you don't really get a choice to resign, but you do get a chance to get out if you want. And whether or not you like any policy change, and there were some policy changes that happened where I watched large cross sections of fellow enlisted go. Look, there were rules when I got here, and those were okay, and now you're changing them. I don't like it. And the answer from the entirety of the brass was, well, when your contract expires, get out of the Marine Corps. Because that's your option.
That's right.
You don't get to go around and write your own policy.
No,
that's
you don't.
Not how it works.
There's a chain of command, obviously, and if someone's insubordinate, they go. Anyway, but
indeed,
I
think have been going a little bit longer.
I think we're over an hour.
Oh yeah, we're at about 80 minutes right now.
It's great fun. Great fun. I really appreciate it.
It is.
I hope to have you on my show.
Well.
Yeah.
You will have to do that. Sten, you know what to do.
We'll set it up.
But before I turn this over to you, since I have to be incredibly appreciative in very Trumpian fashion. It's just the best. It's tremendous. Send me one link with every single social media link inside that link. So if you've enjoyed anything that you hear, I promise you it looks like my social media list. It is everywhere, all of the things, and it is the Linktree link that is at the very top of the description. With that said, though, if there's anything else you want to say on our way out of here, go right ahead. Floor is yours.
I just, I think we all need to kind of get together, those of us who are deplorables in the broad sense, patriots, libertarians, nationalists, populists, disgruntled Democrats. We need to get together and express our concern over what's happening in this country, which I would describe as a slow road to Nazism. And when I say Nazism, I don't mean anti-Semitism and setting up concentration camps, at least not the kind the Nazis had. I just mean National Socialism. And that's what we're looking at now. And I think we need to identify it in any way we can. And the best way to stop it is by exposing it to the sunlight. And that's what I see as my role and as your role.
Not wrong. I hope to be a little bit more of a pain than that. But definitely I'm on the same boat.
Excellent.
So, thank you for coming on down, Charles. Once again, you can find all of the links down in the link to the links down in the description. Thank you all for watching. I will be back in the morning as usual. I might make tomorrow kind of a light show and send you guys off to the weekend without horrible pain. But with that said, remember, fight the progressives wherever you find them and fight them like your life depends on it, because it does. And we're off the air.
All right, Don. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. That was particularly good. There's been a rare thing the past couple of days. I think there are more of us out there than I gave credit for.